You've seen this version before. The city goes quiet. The lights flicker. People step outside, looking up, waiting for instructions that feel reassuring just by existing. Somewhere, a voice says it's temporary. Somewhere, a screen promises help is on the way. And everyone assumes tomorrow will look mostly like today, just quieter. That's the version we've been trained to expect. It's the version where cities are strong because they're big, where density equals resilience, where millions of people packed together somehow make survival easier instead of harder, where the problem is chaos, panic, or bad behavior, and as long as people stay calm, everything holds. It's a comforting story. It's also wrong. Here's what they forgot to mention. Cities don't eat food. They burn it, continuously, relentlessly, on a schedule so tight that it only works if nothing ever pauses, not for long, not even briefly. The modern city survives on motion, not storage, on arrival, not reserves, on the assumption that the next truck is already on the way. And most days, it is. You walk into a grocery store and see abundance, bright aisles, full shelves, choices. But what you're really looking at isn't security, it's velocity. Food moving just fast enough that it never has to stay. Inventory optimized down to the hour. Waste eliminated. Space reclaimed. Efficiency celebrated. It feels permanent because it's familiar, but permanence was never the design. Not because anyone was careless, not because planners were stupid, but because survival wasn't the goal. Speed was. The city is built to consume faster than it can remember, faster than it can store, faster than it can adapt. And that trade-off works beautifully until the moment the flow stutters. Not because people panic, not because society collapses, but because hunger doesn't wait for explanations. Biology doesn't care about population density. Logistics doesn't care how impressive a skyline looks. Math doesn't care how many restaurants you used to have. A city is a system that assumes tomorrow will be fed by tomorrow. It doesn't keep food for later because later was never part of the plan. Later costs money. Later takes space. Later slows things down. Rural towns live inside a different rhythm. They don't look efficient. They don't feel optimized. They don't move fast. But they carry weight the city stripped away. Storage, redundancy, distance, and time. Food that isn't needed today sits quietly until it is. Freezers hum in basements. Pantries exist by habit. Supply chains are shorter, messier, and slower, but they bend instead of snapping. A city doesn't bend. A city empties. A city is a mouth with no stomach. A rural town is a stomach that doesn't panic when the next meal is late. That difference isn't cultural. It isn't moral. It isn't about intelligence or preparation. It's structural. When food stops moving, a rural town feels disruption. A city feels exposure. One system has slack built in by inefficiency. The other replaced slack with speed and called it progress. And speed is useless when movement stops. People imagine cities starve because of disorder, because people lose control. But that comes later, if it comes at all. The real starvation happens quietly before anyone raises their voice. It happens aisle by aisle, hour by hour, delivery by missed delivery, until the shelves don't look rated, they look finished, and the city realizes something it never had to calculate before. Calories are not infinite. Food does not appear on command. Being surrounded by millions of people doesn't mean being surrounded by resources. It means being surrounded by mouths. That's the myth. The city doesn't starve because it's fragile. It starves because it's sharp.
The lie sounds reasonable. It always does. Cities feel safer because they're closer to everything. Food, help, infrastructure. People assume proximity equals security, that being surrounded by options means you'll never truly run out. More stores, more suppliers, more backups. It feels like redundancy. It feels like strength. But that's not how systems work. The reality is quieter and far less forgiving. Cities don't have redundancy, they have synchronization. Everything arrives on time because everything has to. The system doesn't prepare for delay, it optimizes against it. Food isn't stored because storage is waste. Warehouses are centralized, inventories are shaved down. Every extra pallet costs money, space, efficiency. So the city trades slack for speed and calls it progress. And it works. Until it doesn't. Not because something explodes, not because people lose control, but because one link pauses and the rest keep assuming it won't. Rural towns live inside a different assumption. They expect delay. They tolerate inefficiency. Food sits because no one needed it yet. Distance slows consumption. Storage exists by habit, not strategy. When deliveries miss a day, nothing dramatic happens. When deliveries miss a few days in a city, the illusion cracks. Shelves don't empty because people panic. They empty because the math was always wrong. Millions of mouths pulling from a system designed to be refilled daily cannot tolerate interruption, even a brief one. The lie says cities fail when people behave badly. Reality says cities fail when perfectly normal behavior meets a system with no pause button. Standing in line doesn't create food. Staying calm doesn't create food. Waiting doesn't create food. Only delivery does, and delivery is fragile. Cities starve faster not because they're chaotic, but because they're precise. Every movement timed, every calorie accounted for, every buffer removed. Precision feels powerful until it loses timing. Then it becomes exposure. Rural towns experience disruption. Cities experience revelation. The moment when people realize the shelves weren't full because there was plenty, but because everything was moving too fast to ever stop.
Before we go any further, the rules need to be clear. Not opinions, not advice. Rules. The kind that don't bend because people want them to. The kind that don't slow down because a situation feels unfair. Cities don't starve randomly. They starve according to math, predictable math. There is a structure to it, a framework that decides outcomes long before anyone notices shelves thinning or trucks missing their routes. You can call it whatever you like. What matters is that it always shows up the same way. Rule 1 is consumption versus production. A city consumes food at a rate that no dense environment can locally replace. That's not a design flaw, it's the premise. Urban life only works because production happens somewhere else, far away, out of sight. The moment that external production can't keep pace, the city has nothing underneath it. No buffer, no fallback, just demand. Rule 2 is storage equals time. Stored food is survival time. Unstored food is borrowed confidence. Cities are engineered to eliminate storage because storage is expensive and inefficient. Food arrives when predicted demand says it should, then disappears as fast as possible. That system rewards speed, not resilience. Rural towns store food by accident. Freezers, pantries, sheds, supplies meant for convenience rather than catastrophe. No master plan, just slack. And slack is the difference between disruption and starvation. Rule 3 is competition scales faster than cooperation. This is the one people resist because it sounds cynical. It isn't. When supply shrinks, the number of people needing it does not. In a city, millions of people draw from the same shrinking footprint. Order doesn't change that math. Calm doesn't change that math. Cooperation can redistribute food, but it cannot create calories. These 3 rules don't feel dangerous when everything is working. High consumption looks like prosperity. Low storage looks like efficiency. Competition feels invisible. But when movement pauses, all 3 rules activate at once. That's why cities don't decline gradually. They drop. Rural towns fall down slopes. Cities step off edges. This isn't about blaming urban life or praising rural living. It's about structural reality. Cities were built to thrive through continuity, not interruption. And continuity is fragile. Once you see these rules, the outcome stops being surprising. The only variable left is how long the math takes to become visible.
Rule 1 doesn't announce itself. It just starts working in the background, quietly, efficiently, without asking permission. Consumption versus production. On paper, it sounds manageable. Cities don't grow food, but they don't need to. Food comes in, food goes out. The math balances because the system assumes constant motion. That assumption is everything.
A city consumes more food before noon than many rural areas consume in days, and it does so without noticing because the shelves keep refilling. There's no visual signal that anything is wrong, no warning light, no slowdown. Consumption doesn't feel dangerous when supply keeps pace. It feels normal. It feels deserved. But production doesn't live where consumption happens. It lives somewhere else, tied to fuel, labor, weather, timing, and coordination. The city depends on that distance behaving perfectly, every day. When it does, nothing looks fragile. When it doesn't, there is no internal replacement, no local fallback, no hidden reserve waiting to activate. The system was never designed for substitution, only delivery. And delivery is a single-direction promise. Rule 2 follows immediately. Storage equals time. This is where the illusion really tightens. Cities don't store food because storage looks like waste. Extra inventory costs money, takes space, spoils. So it's removed, optimized away. Food arrives just in time to be eaten and leaves just in time to disappear. That efficiency is celebrated as modern, clean, advanced. But what it actually means is the city has traded time for speed. Rural areas didn't make that trade. Food sits because no one needed it yet, not as strategy, just habit. Freezers hum, pantries exist, supplies linger. That lingering is time. And time is the only buffer starvation recognizes. Rule 3 finishes the equation. Competition scales faster than cooperation. This is not about behavior. It's about ratios. When supply shrinks, demand does not. In a city, millions of people are attached to the same shrinking flow. Even perfect order can't change that. Lines don't create food. Calm doesn't create food. Sharing doesn't create food. It only decides who eats first. In rural systems, fewer people draw from wider, slower pools. Distance dilutes competition. Time stretches decisions. In cities, competition is immediate and total because everything is concentrated. These rules don't feel hostile. They feel invisible. They only reveal themselves when the system pauses. And when it does, they activate together. High consumption drains fast. Low storage offers no delay. Competition spikes instantly. That's why cities don't ease into hunger. They cross into it. One moment the system is working. The next, it's exposing what was always underneath.
This is where the timeline appears. Not as an alarm, not as a headline, but as a sequence that unfolds whether anyone is watching or not. Cities don't starve all at once. They starve in order. The order matters. It always looks the same, because the system always fails the same way. First comes the illusion of normal. Shelves are still full enough to quiet concern. Restaurants stay open. Delivery apps keep promising times they can't guarantee. People assume the delay is local, temporary, someone else's problem. Then comes the thinning. Not empty shelves, selective absence. The things everyone grabs without thinking vanish first. Water, bread, milk. Anything that requires no planning, no cooking, no adjustment. After that comes substitution. People adapt without realizing they're adapting. Different brands, different meals, different assumptions. This is the stage where the city tells itself it's fine. Then comes the gap. Deliveries miss their windows. Warehouses don't replenish. The system keeps asking for food that isn't arriving. Shelves don't get looted. They stop being refilled. And that's when the math changes. Lines get longer not because people panic, but because there's less to distribute. Stores limit quantities, which stretches time but doesn't create supply. At this point, hunger hasn't arrived yet, but it's scheduled. Next comes the quiet realization, the moment when people notice that even the unpopular items are gone. The things no one wanted yesterday suddenly matter. Cooking becomes improvisation. Meals become smaller. Calories start being counted without anyone saying the word. And finally, the city reaches the stage it never planned for, the point where demand is constant, supply is intermittent, and storage is gone. There's no dramatic collapse here, no single moment, just a system that has run out of options. Rural towns experience this sequence more slowly. Distance stretches the timeline. Storage blurs the edges. Fewer mouths mean fewer simultaneous decisions. But cities compress the countdown. Every stage overlaps. Every delay multiplies. What takes weeks elsewhere can take days here. This isn't a warning. It's a description. A countdown that starts the moment food stops moving and doesn't care whether anyone believes it yet.
This is the part people misunderstand most. They think starvation begins when food is gone. It doesn't. It begins when choice disappears, when the system narrows quietly, without announcement. At first, nothing looks wrong. Stores are open, shelves aren't empty, people are calm. But the range of options starts shrinking. The system is still moving, just thinner. Fewer deliveries, smaller restocks, less margin. Cities mistake this phase for stability because nothing has stopped yet. But stability isn't about motion, it's about depth, and cities have none. Rural towns feel the same disruption, but it spreads out. Distance slows demand. Storage softens the edges. Time exists. In cities, everything overlaps. Millions of people draw from the same thinning flow at the same moment. Even perfect order can't change that. Lines grow not because of panic, but because there's less to divide. Limits appear not as control, but as delay. Delay feels like safety. It isn't. It's just the system buying minutes with rules. Hunger doesn't arrive screaming. It arrives politely. Smaller meals, skipped items, substitutions that feel temporary, until they aren't. This is where cities lose without realizing it, because once choice is gone, calories are already being rationed by accident, and rationing without storage is just starvation with better manners.
This is where the illusion finally breaks. Not with chaos, not with violence, but with a simple realization that spreads faster than any announcement. The food isn't coming back on schedule. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. The system keeps behaving as it will, because it was never taught how to do anything else. Orders are placed. Requests are logged. Timetables remain unchanged. But nothing arrives to meet them. In rural places, this moment stretches. People wait. They adjust. They eat differently. In cities, the same moment compresses. Millions of people reach it at once. That simultaneity is deadly. Every decision competes with every other decision. Every remaining calorie is claimed by more people than the system can satisfy. It doesn't matter how calm everyone stays. Calm doesn't multiply supply. Cooperation doesn't slow hunger. The math doesn't soften just because the mood is polite. This is the point where cities realize they were never designed to pause. They were designed to flow. And when flow stops, there is nothing underneath it. No reserve, no memory, no patience. Just demand stacked on demand, waiting for a system that no longer knows how to answer.
This is the moment. People look for comfort in explanations. Someone must have failed. Someone must be fixing it. Someone must be in control. Cities are good at creating that feeling because they're full of signals, screens, announcements, procedures that imply order, even when the system underneath is hollow.
This is where the outcome becomes locked in. Not because food is completely gone, but because time is. The system has burned through its last buffer without realizing it had one. There is no hidden reserve waiting to be discovered, no forgotten warehouse full of supplies, no sudden surge that restores balance. Everything that existed was already moving, already promised, already consumed in advance. Cities live one step ahead of themselves,
always borrowing from tomorrow to feed today. When tomorrow fails to arrive, the debt comes due all at once. Rural places can slow. They can stretch meals. They can wait without everyone waiting at the same time. Cities can't. Millions of people reach the same conclusion simultaneously, and simultaneity is what turns shortage into starvation. It's not about bad decisions, it's about synchronized ones. Every remaining option is exhausted in parallel. Every delay is shared. Every adjustment happens too late. This is why cities don't recover mid-failure. They either keep flowing or they fall through the gap. Once the gap opens, nothing inside the city can close it. The system didn't collapse violently. It simply ran out of future to borrow from.
This is the part no one likes to hear, because it sounds unfair. The city didn't do anything wrong. It did exactly what it was designed to do. It optimized. It accelerated. It stripped away everything that slowed it down and replaced it with precision. And precision works, right up until it doesn't. When the flow stops, the same sharpness that made the city efficient turns inward. Every process assumes continuity. Every plan assumes arrival. There is no mode for waiting, only for consuming. Rural places survive disruption not because they're tougher, but because they're clumsier. Inefficiency leaves leftovers. Distance creates delay. Habit creates storage. Cities erased those frictions because they looked like waste. What they were actually erasing was forgiveness. Forgiveness for missed deliveries. Forgiveness for bad timing. Forgiveness for reality. When that forgiveness is gone, the system has no grace period. It doesn't stumble. It drops. And that's why cities starve faster every single time. Not because they're weak, but because they were built to be perfect.
This is where the lesson finally lands, usually too late to be useful. Cities didn't fail because people behaved badly or because planners missed something obvious. They failed because the system did exactly what it was rewarded for doing. It moved fast. It minimized waste. It assumed tomorrow would always arrive on schedule. Rural places never made that assumption. They lived with delay baked in, with waiting as a normal state, with food existing slightly out of reach, slightly out of date, slightly forgotten. That slack looks inefficient until you need it. Cities don't have slack. They have momentum, and momentum only works while something is pushing. Once that push stops, everything keeps moving forward anyway, right off the edge. This isn't a moral story. It's not about who deserves to eat. It's about structure, about systems that only function while every part cooperates perfectly. When that cooperation ends, there is no gentle failure mode, no slow adjustment, just a sudden exposure of how thin the margin always was. Cities don't starve because they are crowded. They starve because they were never meant to pause. And rural towns survive longer, not because they planned better, but because they never optimized away the one thing collapse always demands: time.